This video covers the pizza dough formula and methodology that I follow. Uh, this is the formula that will get you 23 12.5-ounce dough balls, approximately that. As you can see, it's listed in ounces. Everything is weighed: 150 ounces of Neapolitan flour, 100 ounces of water, 30 ounces culture starter, 5 ounces of olive oil, 3 ounces salt, and then to the right of those numbers are the baker's percentages. One thing you'll notice is that those percentages don't sum together to 100%. Baker's percentages follow a little bit different rules that we'll touch on. Those rules are helpful because, as mentioned, this is going to get you 23 dough, but if you only want to make something like 4, you're going to have to divide each item, do a little bit of conversions to get that number. You still have to do math with the baker's percentages, but I think it's easier to standardize the formula that you may find somewhere and reduce or increase the quantity. And like I said, it's all based on weight, so it has a pretty straightforward method of conversion. So we're going to touch on this first and then move on to the first stage of the pizza dough itself. So taking these numbers, the percentages, those numbers, and I've written them out in a formula. I used the number 4 pizza dough earlier, so we're using that as an example. If you don't want to make 23, you want to make 4 dough balls, how do you use this same formula to make that? Well, all you need to know is the baker's percentages and the total weight that you're looking for. So you got 12.5 ounce dough balls, and you want 4 of those, so you're going to want 50 ounces of dough when you're done. So I've supplied that number there. And then this formula is something that we've seen before, but for me, before I was refreshed on baker's percentages, I admit it was some time. So X is going to represent 1, 100%, 1. So basically everything, all of these percentages, that's the part I missed, all of these percentages relate to the 100% to flour. So they're all percentages of that total. So your 100 ounces of water represents, 67%, 66.66, number of the beast, 66.66% of that total flour amount. Your 30% starter represents 20% of that same amount. 5 ounces here of olive oil represents 3.33% of the 150. So that's how these numbers are derived, what they represent. So when you come over to this other page, you can take those numbers and make a formula. You have 1 representing the flour, 0.67, that's that 67% of water, 0.2, that represents the starter, 20%, 0.033, that's your olive oil, and 0.2 represents the 2%. I had something different in the math earlier, so I have 0.021, but don't worry about that for the example. It's not going to change significantly. So either way, you'll get all of those X's equals your total weight. 1 plus 1x plus 0.67x plus 0.2x plus 0.033x plus 0.021x equals 50. So a total of 1.924x equals 50 ounces. So following that math that we learned a long time ago, divide out the 1.924 to get x by itself, and you find that x is going to be 25.99, in this case, ounces, which is our unit. So then if you put that back in autofill, that's your 100%. So we've started back down there. Neapolitan flour equals 100%. So then we take that number, multiply that by 0.67%, and we'll get our water number. So 0.67 or 66.66. You could do it to the decimal if you want, but you're going to round anyway. The same thing on the starter. We're going to take the 25.99 and then multiply that by our 0.2, and that's going to get us starter weight, and follow it all the way down, and this is going to be now the new weights that we need to get a batch of dough that yields us 4 dough balls of 12.5 ounce weight instead of the 23 that this formula will get you. So that's kind of the intro into baker's percentages and the formula that I use for my pizza crust. The second thing in this video is actually the first step of pizza crust. So what I do, let me get my list in. What I do is an extended Autolyse, and basically Autolyse, it's I think most traditional is just mixing water and flour in advance of adding anything else like your leavener, your oil, your salt, anything else to begin development of gluten. A lot of people hold off salt till the end because they say it's a retardant to the yeasts, that it inhibits yeast growth. Personally, I don't end up having those problems. So I do things that I feel are a little bit simpler. I mix the water, the oil together, and I mix the salt and the flour. So everything's put together except the starter. The starter I reserve for later. So you put your water and your oil together in one container, and you have your salt and your flour weighed out in another container, and then you mix them all together, and you do this in advance of when you're going to add your yeast, whether that's sourdough yeast or a traditional instant yeast, doesn't matter. So you're going to mix them together, which I have done, and then I'm going to cover it and leave it for me it's about 12 hours. Now I would call that a pretty long Autolyse. I think 30 minutes to a few hours is pretty standard. I do mine for 12 hours because that fits with my timelines, my schedule, my bake schedule, daily work. Just works better that way. Pull the mixed up Autolysing bowl of water and flour out before I leave, and come back in the next morning ready to add the starter to it. So it just works good for me. I think 30 minutes or an hour to a couple hours is probably pretty standard, probably sufficient. What you notice is that the gluten starts developing before you add anything, the yeast in. So when I do add the yeast, it ends up being pretty easy to get your dough fully mixed up. Then the other thing we do, the other part of step one, is to go ahead and have your weighed out fed starter. This was fed just a little while ago. It's not just starting to basically ferment, so it's sitting at room temperature, getting ready for tomorrow as well. So about 10 hours, 12 hours later, that'll be tomorrow morning, I'll come back in and use all of this starter to go in all of those bowls to actually make the dough that will ferment through the day tomorrow, overnight in the refrigerator tomorrow night, and then be baked the day after. So kind of have to plan in advance for this, but better that way. So there we go.